Hi class, in this video we're going to convert our application to run on SQL Server. In the last video we set up our table on SQL Server and the table looks the same as it did on Microsoft Access, one of the great things about relational database management systems. We know the SQL syntax is the same also, so the main thing that we would have to change to make this application work on SQL Server is going to be in our data access layer, because in our data access layer we have the code, if we look at it, that specifies what data access we're using, what namespace we're using, so that's limiting us to access. So we'll change that to use the SQL Server namespace. Okay, so let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is close all of these tabs, and I want to completely create a new project. So in our solution, I'm going to right click and choose Add, New Project, and I want it to be a Windows Forms app. Now our old project was named DB Access MemberTable, so I'm going to name this one DB SQL MemberTable. And then I'm going to do some copying and pasting. So because we've organized our Access project nicely in these folders, we can select them all, Control click, and copy, and paste them into our new project. Roll those up. Now because we copied in the form that we want to use in the program.cs file that we want to use, we can delete those generic ones that were created for us. Sorry about that. Now, in our user experience, let's take a look at our form, and I want to change the back color so that it's obvious that we're working with a different form. We'll do the blue with the yellow, and I'll have to fix that button because that's just too bad, huh? Great. Now, if we were to run this application right now, we would get an error because we don't have our Access database file included in the project, but that's okay. We're not ready to run it. So first, let's make it the active project, and then let's make it ready to run. In our data access layer, our data access class, as I mentioned, contains the using clause for the OLEDB data connection namespace, and we want to use the SQL Server. So if we let IntelliSense help us, we'll see there are two available for SQL and SQL Client. I'm going to use SQL Client. Now I'm going to need to change each of these classes to the associated SQL one, and that looks pretty consistently like the naming standard. So every place we did have OLEDB, we can replace with SQL. So let's use the Edit, Find and Replace, Quick Replace, and I want to replace OLEDB with SQL. Replace it, replace it, replace it. If you notice, I'm just doing it one at a time so I can look at each one and make sure that things are appropriate. So that Find and Replace has updated all of the different specifications of those object types, those class names in my code. So now I am having everything ready to connect to an SQL Server. I need to change my connection string to be SQL Server oriented. So on Canvas, in our Setup SQL Server Access page, the string is included down here at the bottom of the page. I'm going to copy that and paste it here. And I actually tried to set that up that way, where it was already kind of code, has the plus sign for continuation, but we might have to change a little bit. So in our connection string, we've specified our AWS endpoint, where our database server lives. We need to update username, and you need to set this to your username, which is your OTC username, and then your password. Now the way our databases are set up, we have to transmit in our password, and it's kind of not the kind of practice we would want at work, but it makes life much better for students. So that's it. That's all we need to change. Let's try it. Okay, so remember I added some test data to that table. And there's my data. So everything has worked properly. Now, I hope through this video, if nothing else, it makes you see the beauty of using classes to separate things into different functional objects. By separating out our data access layer, we were able to easily update this application to run using a different database management system. If our code would have been all embedded in our form, we would have been able to do it also fairly easily, right? Because database access is not that hard using C# and Visual Studio, but by separating everything out, we limited our changes to that one class file. We were able to keep our member class file exactly the same as it was, and we could have kept our form exactly the same as it was. We just changed the back color to make it more obvious to us that we were running the correct one. So now we've created originally an access application with all of the logic embedded with the user experience and the data access. We took that application and split out those different layers, those different tiers of processing, and now we've made it all run on SQL Server. Turn that off. So, great job. Take a look at that code. Make sure you're very clear on the changes that were made and how we could do things using our database code. We'll be back with some more advanced items.